He found her reading by firelight in a small cabin deep in the woods. The glow from the flames flickered against the walls, creating a dance of shadows that seemed to echo her restless mind. She hadn't slept in days. Her eyes, framed by dark circles, held 1,000 thoughts as she turned each page of the worn book in her hands. Michael had come to the cabin for peace, to escape the noise of the world that seemed to chase after him. He had hoped to find solace in the quiet of nature, a chance to breathe, to find himself again. Instead, he discovered Sarah, lost in her own world, battling an unseen storm. At first, he stood in the doorway, watching her in silence. Something about the way she read, the intensity etched on her face, pulled him in. It was as if she was trying to absorb every word on the page, fighting against something far greater than just the words themselves. He could feel the weight of her struggle even from a distance. "Hey," he finally said, breaking the quiet that wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. She looked up, startled, her brows knitting together in surprise. "Oh," Michael took a few steps toward her. "It's okay." She tilted her head back to the book, but the words seemed to lose their grip on her. He asked, trying to lighten the mood. "It's not the book," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He sensed the heaviness in her tone, a burden that loomed over her. She let out a sigh, the kind that seemed to drain the energy from her. "I haven't been sleeping well," he pressed gently, genuinely curious. "My father," she said, her eyes glistening. "He's sick, dying actually." Michael's heart sank for her. He could see the struggle behind her words, how deeply they pained her. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "It is," she replied, a tear slipping down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. "Every night I try to sleep, but all I can think about is what's going to happen," he offered. She hesitated, her fingers drumming against the pages of her book. "I don't think talking will change anything." He nodded, sitting across from her on a rough-hewn chair. The fire crackled, filling the spaces between them. "I'm here," he said gently. Sarah took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "It's just so hard to watch someone you love slip away. My dad has always been my rock." As she spoke, Michael found himself leaning in closer, captivated not just by her words, but by the raw emotion behind them. "He was fun," she remembered, a faint smile breaking through her sadness. "He would take me out on the lake at dawn. We'd fish and talk, just the two of us. He always had stories to share, crazy adventures that would make me laugh." Her voice trailed off. He said, seeing a weight she carried that was all too familiar. "Yeah, I feel selfish for wishing things were different, but I do. I want him to be okay." "There's nothing selfish about wanting to hold tight to the good moments," Michael said. "It's human." She looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. He hesitated, feeling exposed. "I lost my brother a few years ago. It was sudden. One day he was laughing, and the next he was gone." They sat in the silence for a moment as the shadows danced on the walls, two souls connecting over shared pain. The world outside felt distant, their struggles intertwined like the roots of ancient trees. Sarah asked after a while, her voice softer now. Michael thought back to those dark nights that followed his brother's death. The arguments he had with himself, the sleepless hours spent staring at the ceiling. "I took long walks, I talked to him, I let the sorrow wash over me like rain on a stormy day." She nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "Maybe you don't need to be strong all the time," he suggested. "It's okay to break down, to let out the hurt. It doesn't make you weaker." "I feel so lost," she admitted, her voice cracking. Michael reached out, something pulling him closer to her. "You don't have to figure it all out at once. Life is not a straight path, it's full of twists and turns." She looked into the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames, and in that moment he saw a small flicker of hope begin to spark within her. He smiled gently. "Start with a little bit of self-love. Just as you love your dad, you have to remember to love yourself too." She studied his face as if searching for something deeper. Michael took a deep breath, the memories swirling in his mind. "I started to write, to pour everything into the pages. It became my therapy. I let the rawness spill out." "Maybe I could try that," Sarah said, a bit of determination surfacing. "Then try it," he encouraged, feeling the warmth between them. His brightened just a little. "I think it's a start," he replied. As they spoke, the fire began to die down and the room grew dimmer, but their conversation blossomed, lifting the weight that had settled so heavily in the cabin. She seemed lighter almost. The tension that bound her began to loosen, and Michael felt a sense of warmth spreading through him too. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you here," she confessed, looking at him earnestly. "I didn't expect to find you either," he admitted. She asked, tilting her head in curiosity. Michael considered for a moment. "I believe in connections. Sometimes people are brought together for a reason." She nodded, contemplating his words. "I like that idea." As the last embers of the fire began to fade, Michael knew his own heart was shifting. It was strange how tragedy could bring light into the darkest moments of life. Two strangers, now connected, both wrestling with their own burdens, finding warmth by the firelight. With a newfound sense of purpose, Sarah picked up her book again, not for distraction, but as a launch pad for the thoughts swirling in her mind. She asked shyly. "Of course," Michael replied, settling back down. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a hint of peace wash over her. She wasn't alone in the darkness anymore. Together, they would face the storm, one page at a time. The wind howled outside, sending a shudder through the walls of the cabin. Snow swirled like ghostly dancers under the pale moonlight. and inside, a fire crackled with a desperate warmth. Amidst the shadows, a figure sat hunched over a book, flickering in and out of the golden glow. He found her there, immersed in the forgotten world of words, and it struck him just how hauntingly beautiful she looked. Her face, lit by flames, bore the marks of sleepless nights, dark circles shadowing her tired eyes, her brow etched with worry. She hadn't slept in days. It was as if the whole world had vanished and left her stranded in a storm of her own making. Michael stood just outside the door, heart racing, time freezing in that moment. He had come to this cabin seeking refuge, a place to escape the chaos of his life, but now he felt like an intruder in her solitude. He called softly, almost afraid to disturb her. She jumped slightly, her eyes darting up from the pages. Her breath caught for a moment. "Sorry," he said, stepping inside, shaking off the cold. As the firelight flickered across her face, he noticed the way she gripped the book tightly, as if it were her anchor in a turbulent sea. He asked, hoping to ease the tension in the air. "It's just a story," she mumbled, avoiding his gaze, her fingers tracing the spine of the book. Michael raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Stories can take us places." She looked up finally, and he caught a glimpse of the storm raging behind her eyes. "I guess I'm not sure where I want to escape to," she replied, a frown tugging at her lips. He was drawn to her at that moment, sensing a shared weight between them, something unspoken that hung in the air. "Makes sense," he said, his voice steady. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, and he sensed a flicker of recognition. "I haven't been sleeping much," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. The question slipped out before he could hold it back. She hesitated, emotions shifting across her face like shadows. "My sister," she finally said, and the tremor in her voice was undeniable. "She's been in and out of the hospital." The weight of her words hung in the air, palpable and heavy. Michael felt a pang of empathy. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "That sounds really difficult." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, surprising even herself. "Holding up, I guess I'm not." He took a cautious step closer, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them like a blanket. Everything, memories, worries, guilt, the nights are the worst, the quiet just lets it all in. Michael could see the storm swirling inside her, a tempest of feelings wrapped up in fear. "It's okay to feel that way, you're human," he said. "Sometimes it's natural to feel lost when someone we love is hurting." She looked up, searching his face for understanding. "You really think so?" "Being strong doesn't mean you don't feel," he replied. "It means you face the feelings, no matter how raw they are," she asked, her voice breaking. "Then you let someone else help guide you through," he said, feeling the honesty of his own words as they settled into the space between them. The flickering light cast ever-changing shapes on her face, and Michael realized he wanted to comfort her, to somehow help lift the burden she bore. For a moment her eyes darted away, lost in thought. Then with a deep, shaky breath, she nodded. "Her name is Emma. We've always been close, but it feels like we're worlds apart right now." "Now it's your turn to hold it together," Michael said gently, "but it's hard when you're feeling fragile." In a way, it started with a bad accident. She fell off her bike last year. It wasn't serious, just some bruises, but then the headache started. Michael could see the anguish in her expression. "She's in the hospital again, struggling to stay awake. I keep thinking, what if it's my fault?" Her words were a raw wound, and he could feel the ache in his own chest. "You've been colliding with guilt and fear," he said, "but remember, it's not your fault." Her eyes flickered as she absorbed his words, something shifting within her. "You don't understand," she whispered with a tremor. "Tell me," he encouraged, wanting to draw her out of the shadows of her own mind. It's not about blame, it's about regret." "Those nights I sat by her bed, wishing I could take on her pain. I think every person who has loved someone deeply feels that way at some point," he said gently. "But it's okay to have your own life too." She nodded slowly, the flickering light illuminating her reflection. "I always thought I had to be the strong one. Then it's time to let someone catch you," he said, his gaze steady. "You're not weak for needing help." Their eyes held in a moment of understanding, walls crumbling under the warmth of vulnerability. In that small cabin, with the fire crackling softly beside them, she began to let the storm inside her ebb, if only just a fraction. "I don't know how to stop this," she confessed, her voice shaking. "Maybe it starts with letting yourself feel," Michael suggested. "Instead of fighting the feelings, try to understand them." "I always used to write," she said softly, "but I haven't in so long." "Then write again," he encouraged, his voice gentle but firm. "Let those words spill out." She looked at him, a glimmer of hope sparking in her eyes. "Maybe I could." "It's a step," he said, feeling a connection blossoming between them, warmed by the flickering firelight and shared pain. "Start small," she asked suddenly, curiosity glinting in her tired gaze. "I do," he admitted, feeling a fond smile tug at his lips. "It's been a lifeline for me, especially after losing my brother." She asked, genuinely intrigued now. Michael paused, the memories flooding back from a darkness that threatened to swallow me up. "He was everything to me, my best friend." Pressed, her eyes searching his face for answers. "It was an accident," he said, the weight of the words lingering. "One moment he was there, the next he was gone. I spiraled for a while, doubting everything." "That's brave," she said softly, being able to put it down. "It is," he replied, feeling the lingering tension ease between them. "I felt lighter with every word, every memory I captured." The The fire crackled and popped, inviting warmth into the room, creating a bubble of safety around them. Outside, the wind still howled, but within these walls, something shifted. With determination, she raised her chin. "I think I will. Do it for you and for her," he said firmly, his eyes encouraging. As the night wore on, they shared stories under the embrace of firelight. Words flowed like water, weaving their hidden fears and unspoken hopes. Michael felt as if he was peeling away layers, revealing more than he ever planned to. Hours passed, and the shadows stretched around them, darkening but not suffocating. She spoke of Emma, her fears, and the guilt that twisted inside her like a snake. He shared moments with his brother, the laughter and the pain, the beauty wrapped inside loss. "Sometimes I think about how he would handle this," Michael confessed, a chuckle escaping him. She asked, genuinely curious. "Sounds like good advice," she said, a small smile brightening her tired face. "Yeah," he agreed softly. By the time the fire had died down, revealing only glowing embers, Sarah felt a change inside her. It was as if the warmth of their shared stories had begun to thaw her frozen thoughts, allowing her heart to breathe again. "I feel different," she said, glancing at the remnants of the fire. "That's a start," he said, his smile genuine. "It's okay if it takes time." "Thank you for being here," she said quietly, emotion filling her eyes. "Neither did I," he admitted, feeling the weight of connection settle deeper. As she wrapped her fingers around her book again, she looked up, a newfound spark in her gaze. "Maybe I'll write about tonight. Sounds like a story worth telling," he replied, warmth filling his heart. In that small cabin, surrounded by darkness and snow, they discovered something powerful. Two souls, once lost in their own storms, now connected by firelight and shared stories. A reminder that even in the depths of despair, there is always hope. And as the fire continued to flicker, they knew they would carry that light with them into whatever lay ahead. The storm raged outside, wind howling like a wild beast, rattling the thin walls of the old cabin. Inside, Sarah was nestled under a blanket, the warmth from the fire flickering against her skin. But it wasn't enough to chase away the cold that gripped her heart. She hadn't slept in days. The pages of the book in her lap were soaked in a mixture of tears and words, but she pressed on, desperate to find a moment's escape from the chaos in her mind. Outside, the howling wind was a haunting echo of her inner turmoil. She could have turned off the light, let the darkness wrap around her, but somehow the firelight felt both like a beacon and a torment. Each flicker reminded her of the moments that had evaporated, of sleep lost to worry. The story before her was a vehicle, yet all she could see were the shadows dancing on the wall. Just then, the door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, shaking off the cold. Michael had fled to the cabin seeking solitude, a temporary retreat from the world that was suffocating him. But the moment he saw her, his heart twisted. She was so lost in her reading, oblivious to the flurry outside, and he felt drawn to her like a moth to a flame. He called, his voice breaking through the quiet. Startled, she looked up, eyes wide and glistening. The book slipped from her fingers, landing softly on her lap. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, stepping closer, taking off his damp jacket. "It's nothing," she replied quickly, pushing the book away as if it were a secret she never wanted to share. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. She looked at him, uncertain, then sighed. "It's just a story." Her voice was barely audible, the weight of her truth almost palpable. He asked gently, tilting his head, trying to gauge her mood. "Not really," she admitted, her gaze drifting back to the fire. Taking a step closer, he felt the tension hang heavy in the space between them. Her eyes flickered, sadness washing over her features. "My sister is in the hospital," she admitted, her voice trembling, "and it feels like I'm losing her." Michael's voice softened, and he let a moment of silence linger. He understood. "I should be there," she said, her voice growing stronger though laced with pain. "But I'm stuck here, fighting my own demons." "It's not selfish," he interjected firmly. "Being human is messy." As the fire flickered, she looked at him, searching for understanding in his eyes. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed, "but I know pain, and I know what it's like to feel trapped." She asked, genuinely curious now, the shadows of her pain momentarily hesitating under the glow of connection. "My brother." "Died in an accident," Michael replied, swallowing hard as memories flooded back. One moment he was laughing, and the next, he was gone. "I can't imagine how that felt," Sarah murmured, eyes wide. "It was," he admitted, "but grappling with that pain and guilt is part of the process." Her gaze softened. "I wrote," he said simply. "It was like my lifeline." "I used to write too," she said, a glimmer of memory lighting her expression. "Maybe it's time to pick it up again," he suggested. "Let the words spill out." "I don't even know if I can," she replied, biting her lip, glancing back at her book. "You can," Michael insisted. A deep sigh escaped her lips, and she looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in her eyes. "What if my words aren't enough?" "Sometimes they don't," he said, his voice steady, "but they can provide a release." The shadows began to retreat under the warmth of the fire, and as they filled the silence together, she felt the walls closing in on her begin to soften. "I don't want to let my sister down," she admitted, her voice breaking. "You won't," Michael said, stepping closer still, sensing her fear. "Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing everything you are. I just don't want to be seen as selfish," she said, her voice trembling. "There's a fine line between caring for ourselves and carrying the world alone," he replied. replied, and it's okay to lean on someone else when you need support. She glanced up at him, vulnerability spilling from her eyes. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in my thoughts. Try starting small, Michael suggested, his gaze unwavering. You don't have to hold it all together at once, take one moment at a time. As if testing the waters, she picked up the book again, her fingers trembling. She mused, her voice just above a whisper, about sitting by the fire. For sure, he said, his eyes sparking with enthusiasm. Their connection deepened, threads of understanding weaving together. In that dim light, she felt a newfound resolve, a flicker of hope emerging from the darkness. She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael's heart quickened, of course. Okay, she said, biting her lip and reaching for a pen, the room holding its breath. In the flicker of firelight, she wrote her first words, letting the ink flow across the page. They were raw and honest, unfiltered, like the feelings wrapping around her. With each stroke, it felt as if she was shedding layers of sorrow. Michael watched, knowing this moment was crucial for her, a step toward healing. I feel lighter already, she said, glancing up and meeting his gaze, a small smile creeping onto her face. Michael smiled back, feeling the warmth of a connection he hadn't anticipated. That's the beginning of your journey, he replied. Keep going. As the night wore on, the storm outside continued to swirl, but inside the cabin, walls that once felt confining began to expand. The two shared stories, memories of laughter intertwined with the sadness of loss. Each tale was like a thread, stitching them closer together. I think about my brother, how he would find joy in the smallest things, Michael reflected. Sarah asked, leaning in, captivated by the sincerity of his emotion. He was fiercely loyal, Michael recalled, nostalgia softening his voice. Always had a goofy joke ready to make me smile. That sounds magical, she said, her heart aching for him. Yeah, he said, nodding. As they continued to share, Sarah felt the grip of her worries begin to loosen. The act of opening up, of letting someone in, was both terrifying and exhilarating. She could feel a shift within her, a glimmer of hope lighting the corners of her mind. I think I might be ready to write a letter to Emma, she said suddenly, her expression thoughtful. That's a beautiful idea, Michael encouraged. She picked up her pen again, a sense of purpose guiding her hand. I'll write about our memories together, the summer days we spent by the lake, the boat rides. That's what it's about, he replied, an infectious smile spreading across his face. Write it all down, the laughter and the tears. With every word Sarah penned, she sensed a catharsis settling over her. It was as if the weight of her thoughts had begun to lift. The quiet chaos of her mind started to give way to clarity, and she felt herself becoming more alive with each passing moment. Hours slipped by, enveloped in the warmth of camaraderie. As the fire crackled, she felt closer to Michael, two souls navigating their storms together, finding strength in vulnerability. Finally, as the first signs of dawn crept through the cabin's windows, she set down her pen. I think that's enough for now, she said, looking at the words sprawled across the page. It's a great start, Michael said, his voice warm and sincere. Thank you for being here with me, she said softly, feeling the weight of gratitude. They sat together silently, the fire now a gentle warmth, and outside the storm began to wane. The sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. With the dawn came the promise of a new day, one filled with potential. I guess I should get going, Michael said, standing up. As Sarah met his gaze, she felt a swell of emotion. Me too. It really is, he replied, a soft smile on his face. You're not alone in this. I won't forget, she said firmly. And as they stepped outside, letting the chill of the morning air wrap around them, she felt a warmth within her, a new beginning amid the ashes of worry. As Michael turned to leave, she called out, hey, if you ever want to talk again, if you ever need someone to share your stories with, I'll take you up on that, he said, his smile reassuring. And as he walked away, Sarah felt a shift within her, the heaviness of sleepless nights beginning to lift. With pen in hand, she would navigate her own storms with newfound hope, letting the firelight guide her, one word at a time. The wind outside howled like a wounded animal, battering against the wooden walls of the cabin, making it creak and groan. Inside, the only light flickered from a small fire that struggled to maintain its glow. He found her there, hunched over a book, the glow of the fire lighting her features in a soft orange hue. She hadn't slept in days. Her eyes, wide and weary, were glued to the pages, but he could tell her mind was a million miles away. Each sentence seemed to slip past her, the words losing their meaning as she wrestled with something deeper. There was a weight about her, a heaviness that hung in the air like thick fog. Michael stood in the doorway, momentarily rooted to the spot. He had come to this secluded cabin seeking solace, a break from the crushing pressures of his life. Instead, he found her trapped in a different kind of turmoil. Hey, he called out softly, unsure if she would even hear him over the wind's relentless roar. She jumped, pulling her gaze away from the book and narrowing her eyes at the intruder. She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, a touch of wariness woven through it. Michael, he replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. I didn't mean to startle you, she echoed with a hint of sarcasm, glancing toward the howling storm outside. Fair point, he said, a small smile breaking through the tension. She returned to the book, her fingers lightly trailing the pages as if seeking solace in their familiarity. I understand, she murmured, though her eyes didn't seem truly focused. Curiosity urged him forward. It's just a novel, she replied, laying her thumb against the spine, discouraging any further inquiry. His instincts, however, pushed him deeper. Just a novel, she glanced up, the ghost of a smile flickering on her lips. It's not the book, she admitted, finally allowing a crack in her guarded demeanor. He took a seat across from her, the warmth of the fire beginning to seep into his skin, but it was her presence that made the room feel warmer. Her expression darkened, shadows creeping back into the depths of her eyes. I haven't been sleeping. Michael straightened, his interest peaked. She's sick, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. It started last year. At first it was just fatigue, but then got worse, he echoed, a frown tightening his brow. Because I didn't notice the signs, she said, anguish etching deep lines on her forehead. I was so caught up in my own life that I didn't see how much she was struggling. An exhausted one, he replied softly, allowing compassion to wash over him. It's easy to overlook things when you're juggling your own world. Sarah's voice cracked, the weight of her thoughts pouring out like a dam that had finally burst. The pain in her words pierced him. Michael felt a deep understanding flood through him, stirring memories of his own losses. You're not alone in feeling that way, he said gently. I lost my brother a few years back. Her gaze shifted, locking onto his, seeking connection amid the rawness of their truths. I learned that grief is messy, he said, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. And it's easy to fall into the trap of self-blame, but it doesn't change what happened. I started writing to make sense of it all. I used to write, she admitted, her eyes glistening with suppressed emotion. But I haven't been able to since. Maybe it's time to pick that back up, he suggested, a spark of encouragement igniting in his voice. Let those thoughts flow onto the page. She shook her head, a mix of fear and frustration etched on her face. What if my words aren't enough? Change doesn't always come from the outside, he replied, letting the truth sink in. Sometimes it's the act of writing itself that can shift your perspective. Sarah hesitated, looking back at her book as if it held the answers. Start by being honest, he encouraged. Write down what scares you, what you want to say to your sister. Tears gathered in her eyes and she instinctively brushed them away. What if she doesn't get better? Then you've shared your heart with her, Michael replied firmly, his voice steady. That connection can transcend even the darkest circumstances. She'll know you care. The fire crackled softly, filling the air with a warmth that seemed to carry promise. Sarah's gaze drifted to the flames, and for a moment she was lost in thought. I want to believe that, she said quietly. Michael watched her, a silent witness to the storm raging within. Trust the process, right for you, right for her. With a deep breath, she picked up a pen that lay nearby, its surface glinting in the soft firelight. Her hands trembled as she began to scratch out a few words on a blank page. Dropping her gaze, she let the ink flow, letting the thoughts spill free. It's hard to watch someone you love suffer, she began, her handwriting shaky but determined. At first, the words came slowly, each one a struggle, but as she continued, the ink flowed more freely. I wish I could take Emma's pain and make it mine. With each line, she felt the tightness in her chest soften, the burden of her thoughts starting to lift. Michael smiled, knowing the power of those small moments, the act of expressing one's pain. As the fire crackled, shadows danced on the walls, and Sarah continued to write her heart out. For the first time in days, the chaos in her mind found a semblance of order. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself, she wrote. Unbeknownst to her, Michael leaned forward, intrigued by the nuances of her vulnerability. He asked gently, wanting her to dig deeper. I was carefree, she said, glancing up, a hint of nostalgia playing on her lips. I used to dance in the rain, climb trees, explore new places. Plied thoughtfully, recalling the laughter of his brother during their own wild adventures. It feels so buried right now, Sarah admitted, looking back at her words, frustration rising again. Start small, he suggested. What if you wrote about those childhood adventures, use them as a reminder? With renewed determination, she set the pen to paper again. I remember dancing in the sunlight, spinning until the world blurred. A smile crossed Michael's face as he watched her spirit begin to surface. That's it, let each memory breathe life into your words. They sat together, the scroll of words unfolding like a map, guiding her back to who she was. As the fire dwindled to glowing embers, Sarah felt a shift. By letting her emotions spill onto the pages, she discovered courage and vulnerability, strength and honesty. I can't believe how much lighter I feel, she said, her eyes shining with realizations. Writing, it is, he said, admiration washing over him. She asked, her voice quavering. Embrace the hurt, he told her firmly. It's part of the process. With the weight of his understanding behind her, she felt a surge of hope. I'll try to remember that, she said, tapping the pen against the page thoughtfully. Absolutely, Michael encouraged. Let her feel that love, that connection. As dawn approached, light peeking through the windows, the storm began to die down. Sarah's words transformed from scattered thoughts into a tapestry of love and honesty. She recalled the moments of joy, the laughter shared between them, channeling it onto the pages as a way to honor her sister. I want her to remember who she is, Sarah said finally, her voice strong. You're already doing that, Michael said, a proud smile on his face. With the first rays of sunlight warming the cabin, Sarah placed her pen down, feeling as if she had finally caught her breath. The weight of worry still lingered, but this new outlet was a glimmer of hope. "Thank you for pushing me," she said with sincerity, glancing over at him. "I'm just glad I could be here," he replied, his heart swelling with a newfound connection. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Sarah looked back at the remnants of the fire, a sense of peace washing over her. The path ahead remained uncertain, each turn full of potential, but now she had a tool, a way to handle the chaos that once consumed her. Walking to the door, she turned to Michael. "Let's promise to keep in touch," he said, determination etched in his voice. As they stepped outside, the chill of the morning air brushed against their skin, yet they both felt lighter somehow, as if the dawn had swept away some of the weight they carried. With each step away from the cabin, Sarah understood that while storms may rage both outside and within, there's always the possibility of finding light even in the darkest moments. And that light often comes with connections made, stories shared, and the courage to confront what weighs us down. The storm raged on, wind whipping through the trees and pelting rain against the windows with furious intensity. Inside an isolated cabin, the only sound was the crackling of the fire, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. In the cozy glow, he found her. She was sitting in a worn, overstuffed chair, a book balanced on her lap, its pages barely visible due to the dim light. The firelight danced across her face, illuminating contours of deep worry etched in her features. She hadn't slept in days. Dark circles framed her eyes, which were bloodshot and unfocused. Each word she read seemed to float away before it sank in, lost to the chaotic thoughts that consumed her. Michael stood in the doorway, drenched and shivering, but all his attention was drawn to her. This wasn't how he envisioned his retreat into the wilderness, yet here she was, a lone figure adrift in a sea of her own troubled thoughts. He could sense the storm inside her was just as fierce as the one outside. "Hey," he said softly, trying not to startle her. She jumped, her gaze snapping up to meet his. The question punctured the stillness of the cabin, her voice laced with surprise and caution. "Michael," he replied, stepping in and closing the door behind him, shutting out the elemental chaos. The corner of her mouth twitched upward, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Looks like we're both stuck here," he said, glancing around the cabin, taking in the fire's warmth and her fragile presence. "It's just a book," she said, her tone dismissive. He nudged. She sighed heavily, reluctantly looking down at the novel resting in her lap. "It's not what you think, it's not the story." There was a vulnerability in her voice that made him lean in, urging her to share more. He prompted gently, sensing an underlying pain in her words. "My sister," she said, almost like a confession, the weight of it filling the room. "She's sick." Michael's heart sank, but he felt the familiar pang of empathy. "I'm really sorry." "Emma," she started, her voice trembling with emotion. "She's been in the hospital for weeks. Helplessness is a heavy burden," Michael said softly, studying her face as she fought against the well of tears threatening to spill over. "Because I didn't see it coming. I didn't notice how much she was struggling until it was too late. I should have been there. I should have paid attention," she said, her voice breaking. The raw honesty in her words struck a chord, evoking memories of his own loss. "You can't control everything," he said gently. "Life throws things at us that we can't predict, and you're not a bad sister for not noticing," she insisted, eyes glistening. Michael hesitated for a moment, reflecting on his own pain. "I lost my brother a few years ago. It was sudden and I spiraled into guilt for months." She asked, her voice steady now, curious. "No," he replied, his tone reflective. "You can't, life doesn't work that way." She considered his words, the tension in her shoulders easing just a bit. "I have," he admitted. "Writing helps me process my grief. I used to write," she said, a flicker of nostalgia crossing her face. "But since this all happened, maybe you should try again," he encouraged. "Let those thoughts out." "I doubt it'll help," she said, her voice heavy with skepticism. "The point is to release what's inside," he explained, leaning forward. "You won't know until you try." She looked at him, surprise flitting across her face. "I know it can," he urged. She hesitated, glancing back at the book in her lap. "Start with how you feel," he suggested. "Write her a letter." The shadows deepened around the cabin, giving a weight to the moment. Sarah bit her lip, thinking hard. "Wish I could just pretend everything is okay, but it's not." "Then write about it," he urged. "Break it down, the fear, the love, the guilt." She took a deep breath, uncertainty swirling in her eyes. "What if my words aren't enough?" "Words have more power than we often realize," he said softly. "They can create bridges between hearts. Just because she's not here now doesn't mean she won't understand you." With trembling fingers, Sarah reached for a piece of paper and a pen resting on the small table. Tension hung heavy in the air as she placed the pen to the page. "Okay, I'll try," she said, her voice firmer now. The pen glided across the paper with hesitance at first. "Dear Emma," she wrote, her handwriting shaky but determined. "I don't know where to begin." Michael watched, heart swelling with admiration for her bravery. "Keep going," he encouraged, nodding. "I wish I could take your pain all onto myself," she continued. "It hurts so much to see you like this." "Let it all out," he whispered, sensing the floodgates slowly opening. She wrote, a bittersweet smile breaking through her earlier sadness. You're reconnecting with her through those memories, Michael said softly, feeling warmth spread through him. As she continued to write, a transformation occurred. Her energy shifted, her eyes brightening with every line. I'm scared, she wrote next, and I don't know what the future holds. It was a poignant moment. The fire crackled softly in agreement, illuminating the room with its steady warmth. I can feel your heart in those words, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. That's what will matter to her. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, blending with the ink on the page, and in that moment it felt like the storm within her had begun to calm. Thank you for pushing me, she said, wiping away the tears but not the emotion. It is, he replied, a smile spreading across his face at her realization. Maybe I can finally get some sleep, she said, glancing up, a hint of hope flickering in her eyes. That would be a great start, he encouraged. With each passing moment, the connection between them deepened. They were two souls caught in their storms, finding solace within each other through shared experiences. She asked suddenly, her expression turning serious again. I write, he said simply. I embrace the hurt, but I know I have to keep going. Grief is not linear, it ebbs and flows. I feel like I can't breathe sometimes, she said, shaking her head. It's okay to acknowledge that, he reassured her. It doesn't mean you're weak. She looked down, the ink glistening on the page as she wrote again. I need to believe that, she murmured, the pen moving steadily. Then fight, he said, a sense of purpose evident in his tone. Let those words arm you with strength. As she penned her thoughts, the storm outside began to recede, the wind giving way to a gentle breeze. It was as if the universe, too, was celebrating her small but significant victory. I can't believe I let myself feel this, she said, a hint of laughter breaking through her tears. That's a beautiful realization, he said, feeling pride swell in his chest. Embrace it. Sarah finished her letter, her heart racing with emotions. I think I might send it to her, she said, looking up with conviction. Michael beamed at her. You should. As the warmth of the fire continued to envelop them, Sarah felt lighter than she had in days. It was as if the burden she carried had begun to lift, replaced by a flicker of hope, a reminder that sharing her feelings could breathe life back into her world. When she finally stood up, stretching her limbs, she felt a strange wave of relief wash over her. I think I truly want to reclaim myself, she declared, determination glinting in her eyes. He said, standing to join her, you have the power. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah recognized that the storm inside her wasn't the end. It was a passage, a tumultuous journey leading her back to herself. As the sun began to rise outside, the first light filtering through the windows, Michael took a deep breath, savoring the moment. I came here hoping to find peace for myself, but I think I found something even more powerful, he said softly. She asked, her voice still laced with wonder. Connection, he replied, meeting her gaze with warmth. Sarah smiled, the light of the dawn catching the hope in her expression. Thank you for being here tonight, she said, her voice sincere. It's amazing what happens when we embrace our vulnerability, he said, feeling a surge of gratitude that their paths had crossed in this desolate cabin. As they stood together in the quiet aftermath of shared pain and healing, the world outside transformed. The storm had passed, revealing a new day, a testament to resilience and the strength found in both connection and vulnerability. Sarah stepped toward the door, ready to face whatever lay ahead, feeling a flicker of courage reignite within her. And as Michael followed suit, he couldn't help but feel hopeful, too, a reminder that even within our darkest storms, there's a chance to find light. Together, they stepped into a world painted anew, each carrying a piece of the other, a bridge built over shared pain and an unbreakable bond forged by firelight. He found her reading by firelight in a cabin tucked away in the woods, where the wind howled like a wild beast outside. The storm had arrived, wreaking havoc in every corner, but inside, the world felt different. The crackling flames flickered, casting shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls. She hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red-rimmed and dull, the joy of reading stripped away, leaving only the physical act of turning pages. Michael stood at the entrance, his damp clothes clinging to him after he dashed through the downpour. He had only come for some peace, a break from the clamor of everyday life, but instead he found her haunting figure lost amid the pages of a book that seemed to be an escape from her reality. Hey, he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, and for a moment there was a spark of surprise in her eyes, but that spark quickly dimmed, replaced by a veil of exhaustion. Hi, she replied, her voice rough, barely carrying over the sound of the wind battering the cabin. He asked, taking a few cautious steps inside. Just a story, she said, but her tone suggested it was much more complicated than that. He echoed, intrigued. It's not the story, she said, her voice catching slightly. Michael stepped closer, the warmth of the fire flickering against his skin, yet there was a chill in the air that felt familiar, a reminder of his own dark nights. A heavy silence settled between them as she wrestled with her thoughts. I just haven't been sleeping, she finally admitted, her gaze now cast downward at the book in her lap. He asked, his curiosity piqued, wanting to understand the storm in her heart. My sister, she murmured, her voice breaking ever so slightly. She's been sick. Michael felt a pang of understanding. I'm really sorry. It is, she said, the walls of her composure slowly starting to come down. Every time I close my eyes, all I see are images of her in the hospital, connected to machines. I feel trapped, like I'm losing her. He asked gently. Emma, she replied, swallowing hard. Michael echoed, unable to restrain himself. I've been so wrapped up in my own life, she whispered. I should have seen the signs. He took a deep breath, feeling his heart constrain in sympathy. It's easy to get caught up in our lives. People can fall through the cracks without us even realizing it, he said softly. Her voice cracked. That thought keeps me awake. Michael recognized the anguish in her words. It was all too familiar. He had felt it himself not long ago. You're not alone in feeling that way, he confessed, his admission hanging heavy between them. I lost my brother a few years back. He faltered for a moment. Her eyes widened as she drew a shaky breath. It's okay, he assured her, but he could see the pain reflected in her own eyes. I spiraled into a pit of guilt. I questioned everything I could have done differently. She nodded, the firelight painting her face in shadows, exposing the turmoil behind her calm exterior. I turned to writing, he said, a hint of nostalgia slipping into his voice. It was my lifeline. Putting my feelings into words made the ache a little lighter. I used to write, she said, her voice softening with the memory. Maybe now is the time to start again, Michael suggested, his tone encouraging. Let those feelings flow, she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Words have the power to soothe, he said softly. They can create bridges even when people are far apart. Something shifted in her expression, a hint of hope sparking in her tired eyes. I suppose I could try, she murmured, glancing back at her book, then looking up at him again. I know it can, he replied with determination, but it only works if you let yourself be vulnerable. As she stared into the fire, contemplating his words, Michael felt an unexpected urge to reassure her further. You could start with a letter, he suggested. Write it to her, no holds barred. She swallowed hard, her fingers curling around the pen resting on the table. Okay. The room was decidedly quiet as she picked up the pen, the crackle of wood in the fireplace the only sound as she began to write. Each stroke of the pen felt like a small act of defiance against the storm that had consumed her. Dear Emma, she wrote, her letters forming slowly yet deliberately. Michael watched, feeling an unusual sense of intimacy in the simple act of her writing. Keep going, he encouraged gently, wondering about the words she was forming. I'm terrified, she continued, her voice wavering slightly as she read the words aloud. I keep replaying moments in my mind where I could have been a better sister. Let it out, he urged, sensing the emotions swelling within her. A tear slipped down her cheek, leaving a trail that mirrored the words on the page. I want you to know that loving you has been one of the greatest joys of my life. That's beautiful, he said, amazed at her vulnerability. I just don't want to lose you, she whispered, barely audible over the crackling fire. The room felt charged with emotion, each word she wrote a hammer striking against the walls of her pain. The flickering flames illuminated her face, tracing the lines of anguish etched in her features, yet also hinting at the fierce determination buried deep within. It's powerful to confront those fears, he said. You're reclaiming parts of yourself that felt lost. As the minutes passed, her handwriting grew steadier, the words flowing more freely, transforming the page before her into a safe harbor, one she hadn't realized she needed. I wish we could go back to our laughter in the park, to running through the grass under the sun, she wrote, capturing those precious moments that felt both distant and immediate. The fire crackled, lending warmth to the revelation hanging in the air. It seemed to resonate with her, and she continued, You helped me be brave, Emma. Michael felt a swell of emotion watching her lay bare her heart. It was a reminder of what he had lost and what he hoped to rebuild in himself. Those memories give you strength, he said softly. She paused momentarily, looking up at him with a flicker of hope in her eyes. Absolutely, he said, his voice steady. With that encouragement, she filled the page, pouring her heart out, allowing the emotion to run free. There was power in her expression, each stroke a declaration of love, regret, and hope intertwined. The world outside continued to roar, the wind howling, but within the walls of the cabin, a different kind of storm raged, one of raw vulnerability and healing. I feel lighter, Sarah said suddenly, her voice reflecting disbelief. That's the magic of letting things out, Michael replied, truly moved by the shift he witnessed. I can finally breathe again, she said, brushing away another tear as she finished her letter, the act of writing unlocking something she'd thought lost. Trust yourself, he encouraged. With a sense of accomplishment, she set the pen down, looking at the page as though it were a treasure. Thank you for being here with me tonight, Sarah said, her voice more confident than before. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, he admitted, feeling a spark of gratitude for the unexpected connection that had formed between them. As the fire began to settle into the last glowing embers, Sarah looked up at him, a sense of warmth flooding through her. Maybe I can write more. Exactly, you give her a part of yourself through your words, he said, his heart swelling with pride for her. With the dawn approaching, light began to filter through the fog of the storm. It felt like a new beginning, a turning point. They had both shared pieces of themselves, raw and unguarded, finding comfort in each other's company. As they prepared to leave the cabin that had transformed from a refuge into a safe space for healing, Sarah felt a shift within her. I think I'm ready to face whatever comes next, she said, determination shining in her eyes. Just remember you're not standing alone, Michael said, stepping toward the door. Your story matters, and so does mine. They stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the once tempestuous wind now a gentle breeze, welcoming them into a world that felt renewed. As Michael waved goodbye to her, a sense of hope filled the space between them. Two strangers now bonded by shared experiences, emerging from the shadows of their pasts, ready to embrace the light ahead. In that moment, beneath the sprawling sky painted in hues of gold and blue, Sarah realized that even in the face of darkness, the simplest act of connection could lead to the most profound healing. She stared across the horizon, ready to reclaim her story, one word at a time. He found her reading by firelight, the flickering flames casting warm shadows across her face. The gusts of wind outside roared like angry spirits, a storm brewing in the night. She sat alone, wrapped in a frayed blanket, the book in her hands forgotten, pages curling at the edges. She hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, as if she had been wrestling with demons that haunted her every night, preventing her from finding peace. Michael had ventured to this remote cabin in search of solace, a place to escape from the relentless noise of his life. The moment he stepped inside, however, he was met with a different kind of chaos. She was a ghost of herself, lost between the words on a page and the heavy reality that pressed down around her. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She jumped slightly, her gaze darting to him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Michael," he answered, stepping further into the light. "I didn't mean to intrude." "It's not," she replied, but her voice lacked the energy to sound truly hostile. It was more like a whisper carried on the wind. He asked, curiosity sharpening his tone. "Sarah," she said, returning her gaze to the book, though it was clear she wasn't really reading anymore. Michael took a step closer, drawn in by the heaviness that surrounded her. "It's just a story," Sarah said, dismissing him with a wave of her hand, but he could see her eyes were far away, locked onto memories that tormented her. "It must be something powerful for you to be so lost in it," he probed. "It's not the story," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. She looked up, searching for the right words amidst the storm within her. "I haven't been able to sleep." Michael pressed gently, the concern in his voice urging her to open up. "My sister," she said, her voice trembling. "Emma." The weight of her words hit him like a freight train. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "It started with what they called a simple infection, but it progressed. It's more serious now," she said, her gaze dropping back to the book, though it had become a mere prop. "And every time I close my eyes, I see her in that hospital bed, looking so frail." Michael asked, feeling a familiar ache in his chest. He could see the sorrow etched in her features, for not being there. "I was so wrapped up in my life, the noise, the demands." "You're not alone in feeling like that," he reassured her, memories of his own past flooding back. "I lost my brother a few years ago, and I still wrestle with guilt." Her eyes widened, vulnerability spilling into her voice. "It was an accident, sudden and without warning. One day we were laughing over dinner, and the next he was gone," he confessed, recalling the sharp pain that had never really faded. "I had this overwhelming need to turn back time, to change what happened." "You feel frozen," she said, and he could see the flickering of understanding in her gaze. "Exactly," he replied, wishing he could offer her reprieve from her pain, but wrestling with those feelings is part of healing. She looked away, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "I've been so focused on worrying about Emma that I haven't taken a moment to breathe." "It's not selfish," he said firmly, stepping closer, his voice low and reassuring. "You have a right to those feelings." "But what if something happens to her?" she whispered, her voice small, fragile. "You can't control the future," he reminded her, his heart aching for her. "Hold on to the love you have for her." She looked up, the weight of sorrow heavy on her brow. "How do you do that?" "I turned to writing," he said, remembering the way words had poured from him like a river of emotion. "It was how I made sense of my grief. I wrote letters to my brother, shared my thoughts and regrets." She echoed, a hint of skepticism in her tone. "Writing lets you process your feelings," he explained. "It doesn't erase the past, but it helps clear the fog." A flicker of hope ignited in her eyes. "I know you can," he encouraged. Contemplation deepened in her gaze as she considered it. "Maybe I could write her a letter," Sarah mused, looking down at the blank page in front of her. "Absolutely," Michael replied, a smile breaking through the tension. "Let each word carry your love, your regrets, your memories." Taking a deep breath, Sarah reached for a pen, her hands trembling slightly. As she began to write, the fire crackled softly, illuminating the room with a warmth that seemed to seep into her bones. "Dear Emma," she started, her handwriting hesitant but resolute. "I don't know how to express what I'm feeling." Michael sat silently, watching her find her rhythm. Each stroke of the pen released a little bit of the tension coiled in her shoulders. "I've been scared," she continued, her voice quaking as she read aloud. "Scared that I haven't been the sister you need." "You haven't," Michael reminded her softly, feeling the connection deepen. "I wish I could take your pain away," she wrote next, tears slipping down her cheeks, but they felt different now, lighter, almost freeing. "You are," Michael said gently, sensing the weight beginning to lift from her heart. She continued, the words pouring out like a dam breaking, the walls of her vulnerability crumbling. Every moment we shared, every laugh, every tear, they make me feel alive even if you don't know it right now. Inside the cabin, time seemed to slow. Outside, the wind still howled, but here in this cocoon of warmth and honesty, it felt like a different world altogether. Sarah's heart began to heal, little by little, stroke by stroke. I want to remember us laughing in the park, chasing fireflies, she wrote, a bittersweet smile curling her lips. See, you're connecting with her, Michael said, his voice calm and steady. Minutes ticked by and Sarah poured herself out onto the page, her fears mingling with hope, regret with love. As the fire crackled softly, the walls of the cabin felt a little less confining, a little more inviting. She set her pen down, the page filled with emotions she had struggled to articulate. I can't believe I just wrote all that, she said, astonished. It's a testament to your strength, Michael responded, pride swelling in his chest. Sarah's vulnerability returned suddenly, the shadows creeping back. Sometimes it's not about whether it's enough, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. It's about the connection, the love in your words. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself a small smile, a flicker of hope lighting her features. You're right, yes, he said, warmth spreading between them. Feeling lighter, she looked at the smoldering embers in the fireplace for a moment. Thank you for being here tonight, she said genuinely. I'm just glad I could help you discover it, he replied, noticing how different she looked now alive despite the challenges looming ahead. As they sat together in the soft glow of the fire, sharing quiet moments of vulnerability, Sarah realized that while the path ahead was still uncertain, she now had the tools to navigate through it. The burden of her fears felt lighter and the storm had become a little quieter. She asked, her eyes now shining with uncertainty mixed with determination. Take the letter to her, Michael suggested. I will, she agreed, newfound purpose brightening her tone. And I think I might continue to write. Writing can be a way to honor your emotions, he encouraged. As the clock ticked away the hours, the storm continued to wane outside, turning into a soft patter of rain against the cabin. Time moved differently inside. The soothing embrace of the fire and the release of bottled feelings had created a sacred space. Sarah turned to him, her expression contemplative. Of course, Michael said, curious. She asked, genuinely wanting to understand. A wistful smile spread across his face as memories of laughter danced in his mind. He was joyful, a light in the dark. Sarah asked quietly, her gaze locked onto his. I'm still finding it, he admitted. Grief is complicated. I want to believe that, she said, a touch of wonder in her voice. Then do that, he encouraged, heartened by her resolve. Take each moment and transform it into something beautiful. As dawn approached, casting its first light through the window, Michael felt a sense of things coming full circle. They were two souls navigating turbulent waters but emerging stronger, anchored in shared understanding. I guess it's time for me to face the day, Sarah said, a blend of gratitude and determination in her voice. Remember this moment, he said, rising from his chair, offering a reassuring smile. Every time it feels heavy again, go back to your words, your memories. As she rose as well, she looked at him for a long moment. Thank you for this. It was my pleasure, he said, feeling a warmth inside that he hadn't expected when he entered the cabin. With the storm behind them, both outside and within, they stepped into the new day. Although the path ahead remained filled with challenges, they would carry the resilient spark from their meeting, the realization that even in the darkest nights, a flicker of hope could be found by sharing pain and opening their hearts. And as they went their separate ways, both Michael and Sarah felt lighter, armed with the knowledge that love and connection could bridge any storm, leaving space for healing even amidst the most turbulent of times. The storm howled outside, the wind whipping through the trees like a wild animal unleashed. Inside the small, cozy cabin, the only light came from a small fire crackling in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. He found her there, slumped in a battered armchair, a book in her lap, but she wasn't really reading. She was lost in a world of her own, her mind miles away. He noticed her eyes were glassy, as though she hadn't slept in days, and the weight of her thoughts seemed to fill the room. Michael stood at the door, unsure if he should intrude. He had come to this isolated retreat seeking peace and quiet, a chance to escape from the chaos of his life. And yet here she was, a haunting presence in the dim light, wrapped in a frayed blanket with the book resting limply in her hands. Hey, he called out softly, wanting to break the heavy silence without startling her. At the sound of his voice, she jolted, her head snapping up. Surprise washed over her features, quickly replaced by something that looked like annoyance. She asked, the edge in her voice tempered by fatigue. Michael, he replied, stepping cautiously into the cabin, letting the door close behind him against the wailing storm. She looked him over, uncertainty flickering in her tired eyes. He asked, hoping to shift the mood. It's just a story, she mumbled, eyes drifting back to the pages as if reading would provide an escape from her reality. He pressed, noting the way her fingers traced the spine of the book tender, almost protective. She let out a short laugh devoid of humor. It's not the story, she admitted, her voice cracking. He repeated, sensing a deeper turmoil beneath her calm surface. She inhaled sharply, and he could sense the shift as she wrestled with her thoughts. I haven't slept in days, she confessed, her vulnerability dripping from each word. Michael prodded gently. "Emma," she said, her voice catching. "My sister, she's been sick." Michael felt a pang of empathy twist in his gut. It started as something minor, just an infection, but it's turned serious, she explained, her eyes finally meeting his. The storm raging outside felt like a distant echo, dwarfed by the tempest inside her. "I should have noticed sooner." "You can't blame yourself for what happened," Michael reassured her. She shot back, her frustration evident. "I could have changed things, I should have seen it coming." The pain behind her words hit him directly in the heart, and memories of his own loss blurred his vision. "I know that feeling well," he said quietly. "I lost my brother a few years ago. It was sudden." "I'm sorry," she said softly, absorbing the gravity of his words. "I wrote," he admitted, the truth spilling out like ink from a pen. "It became my escape. Each word was a way to process my grief and guilt." She echoed, her tone skeptical. "Sometimes the act of writing can change everything," he replied, leaning in slightly. "It can turn chaos into clarity." She didn't respond right away, her gaze flickering back to the flames, lost in thought. "I used to write," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "Maybe now is the time to start again," he encouraged, hoping to spark a flicker of inspiration. "Let those feelings flow onto the page," she asked, the doubt creeping back in like a shadow. "It's about connection. You don't know what your words can do for her until you try," he urged gently. After a beat, she hesitated. "I know it will," he assured her. "It's a way to communicate what you might not say in person." She picked at her blanket, wrestling with uncertainty. "Start with what you feel," he suggested. "Write to her, share everything." With a deep, shaky breath, she grabbed a pen from the table, its surface cool against her fingertips. As she began to write, Michael sat in silence, letting the room fill with the sound of scratching ink on paper. "Dear Emma," she read aloud, her voice wobbly but steady. "Keep going," he encouraged softly, feeling the weight of her emotions hanging in the air. "I wish I could take your pain away," she continued, her voice catching slightly. Each word she wrote felt like an anchor amid the chaos, grounding her in the present while allowing her soul to fly free. "I'm terrified," she wrote next. Michael could see the tears pooling in her eyes, but they didn't feel heavy. There was something cathartic about them, like raindrops washing away dirt from the ground. "Let it all out," he urged. "I miss our laughter in the park and chasing fireflies," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "That's beautiful," Michael said quietly, his heart swelling with admiration for her courage. The storm outside intensified, but inside the cabin it felt like the world was getting a little lighter. Sarah's words, once trembling, emerged with a newfound power. "I want you to remember the good times, the fun we had," she continued. With each word, the chains of guilt binding her heart began to loosen, and Michael felt a warmth rising between them, forging a connection that transcended their individual pain. Minutes rushed by. The more she wrote, the more liberated she felt. "I want you to know how much I love you," she flowed. In that moment, Sarah found clarity amid the chaotic storm inside her. The act of writing had become a sacred ritual, one that allowed her to transform fear into something tangible. He set the pen down, surprised at the words she had managed to conjure. The fire crackled softly, illuminating the room in a warmth she hadn't felt in a long while. "I can't believe I just wrote all that," she said, astonished, a smile breaking through her tear-stained face. "It's incredible," Michael replied, pride evident in his tone. She asked, her heart racing as reality washed over her. "Now you take the letter to her," he suggested. "Let her feel your love, even when you can't be physically present." Sarah nodded, a flicker of determination sparking in her eyes. "I will," she said with conviction, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders, as if to shield her newfound hope from the world outside. But as they stood in the cozy glow of the firelight, the room was suddenly invaded by a loud crack, a thunderous noise that echoed through the walls. Michael glanced out the window just as a bolt of lightning illuminated the sky, and a flash of fear danced across his face. He asked, his heart racing. She whispered, her eyes widening with unease. "It sounded like something fell," he said, moving cautiously toward the door. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation. "Maybe it's just the storm," she suggested, her voice shaking slightly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I'll check it out," he said, opening the door a crack to peer outside. The wind whipped at him, threatening to pull him back, but he stepped out, alert to the world beyond the warmth they had created. Just as he stepped onto the porch, another jagged streak of lightning illuminated the landscape. The trees swayed violently, their branches clawing at the sky. But then he noticed it, a dark figure stumbling through the underbrush, drenched from the rain, moving erratically. "Hey," he shouted, voice barely carrying over the wind. The figure turned abruptly, wide eyes reflecting the panic of the storm. In that instant, Michael felt a chill race down his spine. The figure cried, desperation in their voice. Michael rushed forward, struggling against the wind. But before the stranger could respond, another loud crack echoed through the air, this time much closer. The ground trembled beneath them, and branches fell from the trees like heavy swords. He shouted, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he reached for the figure. As he pulled the stranger into the cabin, Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The stranger stumbled in, drenched and disoriented, their wild eyes searching the room before landing on Sarah. Sarah replied, stepping back instinctively. The stranger panted, their voice heavy with panic. And just as the urgency settled in the air like smoke, the storm grew louder outside, a growling beast that threatened to unleash its full fury. In that moment, the weight of the world shifted. The quiet connection they had formed was shattered, replaced by an urgent need for survival. The book lay forgotten, the letter still unfinished. Michael asked, glancing at Sarah, uncertainty flooding his heart. She stammered, the warmth of the fire forgotten as dread began to coil in her stomach. The stranger turned to them, fear etched across their face. You don't understand, we're in danger. And in that instant, something shifted in the atmosphere. The storm howled louder, a warning resonating from the chaos outside as every eye turned toward the door, sensing that whatever was out there was no longer just a storm. It was something far more sinister. As the weight of their options pressed down on them, uncertainty blanketed the cabin, and the fire crackled ominously behind them. What they did next would change everything. Would they run into the storm or confront the danger lurking within? The answer hung heavy in the air, waiting to be revealed as the night wore on. The real fight was just beginning.